The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, in the gym, and out there on the road, long before I dance under those lights. Muhammad Ali. Zach, you need to get into the game. At this point, it almost doesn't matter what you are doing, coaching baseball or football, working at the VA, starting your farm, it's just time to get to work. Part of the joy of entertainment is that we can appreciate the fruits of someone's labor without having to do the work ourselves. We watch the dance, but we don't have to sweat. We watch the game, but we don't have to practice through injury. We watch the play, but we don't have to write, direct, act, light, or rehearse. But if we're entertained too much and forget to practice ourselves, we'll lose sight of the work behind the beauty in front of us. We come to believe that dancers, players, and actors simply have talent, and we can forget that they have to struggle every day to develop it. We see the product, but forget the sweat that put it there. We forget that what looks effortless is usually the product of years of effort. One benefit of pursuing excellence in your own life again is that it will shape the way you see the world around you. Whether it's a great game you watch, meal you eat, or story you read, you're more likely to see the sweat and care that went into it. Working hard yourself makes you more appreciative and respectful of the hard work of others. Zach, this is going to read like a Zen koan, but I want you to practice, practice. You must practice the art of practicing. Let me explain. When most people practice, they think of themselves as practicing how to do something. What if, instead, you think of yourself as learning how to practice something? If you learn how to do something, change a tire, prepare a canvas, develop a photograph, pour concrete, make macaroni and cheese, then you've learned how to do one thing. If you learn how to practice, then you have learned how to learn anything. It is only through practice that we attain excellence in any endeavor. And perhaps the greatest skill we can learn is the skill of practice itself. We've already talked about some of the things that go into good practice: finding a model, thinking about identity, forming the right habits. The point I want to impress upon you now is, you can practice more than you imagine. You know that we can practice games and sports and instruments. But we can also practice, for example, gratitude. A daily practice of writing down things we are grateful for will, in time, make us grateful people. In my experience, it will also make us happier. We can practice self-examination. Seneca recommended looking back over each day's actions before going to bed. He said that you should ask yourself, what evils have you cured yourself of today? What vices have you fought? In what sense are you better? When the torch has been taken away and my wife, already used to my habits, has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and measure what I have done and said. I hide nothing from myself. We can practice prayer. We can practice compassion. We can practice courage and math and speaking with confidence and how to braid our daughter's hair. We can practice the habits of being a good father and husband and son. We can practice our vocation. People who don't understand the possibilities inherent in practice often conclude that they are a certain way. When they fail or succeed, they think, I am stupid, or I am smart, or I am lazy, or I am evil, or I am fat, or I am funny. By concluding that they are a certain way, they fix their identity to the present and the past, and they often look to the future with fear and trepidation. Those who practice use their experience to inform who they can be. That happened, so next time I should, or if that happens again, I'll, or that was great, and to get even better, then next time I should practice. Several letters back, I wrote to you about how resilience is not about bouncing back but about moving through. Learning how to practice is essential to moving through, because it is the discipline of practice itself that allows you to take what happens to you, integrate it into your experience, and then act again. The more you see that life can be practiced, the more resilient you will become. Almost everything can be practiced, but practicing anything starts with the will to work. When I was boxing at Oxford, my friend Ben was the captain of the university team. You'd like Ben. He grew up in South Dakota, spent a lot of time bow hunting in the woods, worked as a hotshot on one of the fire crews out west. He's got a gaggle of great stories about being attacked by crocodiles while kayaking in Australia, or hunting wild boar with spears in the South Pacific. I'll tell you a few of my favorite things about Ben. 1. The man could not conceal an emotion to save his life. If someone was saying something that Ben thought was rude or stupid, Ben would look at the guy with a face of absolute disgust. 2. A quick story. Ben was dating Angela at Oxford, and they're now married with 3 beautiful kids. Angela is black, and one day she was walking down the street and some hooligan yelled something racist at her. Then he yelled again. Angela walked a little faster, and the guy kept taunting her. When he walked away, Angela followed. Unfortunately for him, he went right past where Ben lived. Angela banged on Ben's window and told him what happened, so Ben jumped out of the window wearing socks and shorts and chased the guy for over a mile through the streets of Oxford. When Ben had him cornered, the man threatened to take a swing at him. Ben was never scared of taking a punch, and he leaned forward, offered his chin, and said, "Please, just give me an excuse." The man never took that swing, he stayed right there until the cops came. 3. Ben tends to talk a lot when he's sitting down with his friends, but he's not much for public speeches. At the beginning of the boxing season, dozens of guys would come down to the gym wanting to try out for the Oxford boxing team. As they stood waiting for the first practice to begin, they expected to hear some words of welcome, some explanation of how the boxing team worked. Ben stood up, and this was his whole speech. "We do 2 things here. We work hard. And we win. The reason we win is that we work hard. So really, we only do 1 thing here. If you don't want to work hard, don't waste my time." Then practice started. "Look, Walker, you're a hard worker. You always have been. About that there's no doubt. And you know that victories are won and excellence is achieved not on the field but in practice. You know that the gap between good performers and exceptional performers is not between those who know a lot and those who know a little, but between those who give some of themselves to their practice and those who give all of themselves. You know that excellence comes wrapped in hard work. You know that the will to win is cheap and common, while the will to train is rare and noble. With other people, you might worry about their will. That's not your problem. Your challenge right now is that since you've left the military, you can't see clearly what to train for, and you're struggling to figure it out. How do I train for all of these other things that are happening in my life? When you coach the kids on your football team, you don't get to rewrite the standards of excellence, any more than you get to rewrite the rules of the game. In football, a good tackle starts from the leading shoulder and wraps up the ball carrier. In baseball, a good fastball arrives at a point between the batter's chest and knees. There's no faking your way around these techniques, they are correct or they aren't. Athletic contests offer a clarity that's often missing from the rest of our lives. There are rules and points, time limits and victors. It's part of what makes watching sports enjoyable. It's also one of the reasons why the Greeks and the Romans put such a strong emphasis on physical training. They lived, of course, in a world that demanded physical strength, from farming to warfare. Yet they also understood that in order to train the spirit you had to train both mind and body, and that in training children to play games they had clear opportunities to train them in the virtues. Now, sports are also an extreme case. A good life is not nearly as simple as a home run or a touchdown. Life isn't a sport or a mission, but we can still create clarity in our own lives about what is good. I recently spoke to a group of pipefitters and steelworkers. In these trades, the pipes fit or they don't. Water flows or it does not. Structures hold or fall. In short, there are clear standards for what is good. The same can be said of other work. A carpenter has a level. A business has a bottom line. A team looks at the scoreboard. Some standards of the good are so easily measured that they can be understood by anyone. You place a level on a table and you look, is the table level? Other standards are harder to formulate. Think of a social worker who is sent into a home with the charge of protecting a child from possible abuse. What constitutes excellence here? The social worker is operating with imperfect information in a web of new relationships. She wants to respect the parent's right to custody of their child, while aiming to protect the child from abuse, while also knowing that removing the child from a difficult home may end one hardship only to begin another. In this case, coming to a shared and common standard about excellence is a much tougher task. One of the reasons why we talked about models before and in so much detail is that especially when things get messy, your models can provide you a standard for excellence in your work. When you don't know where to look for a standard, you can start by asking, what would they do if they were here? Every few months we've been getting a group of veterans together, and at one of these meetings I wrote this equation in front of them. The magnitude of the challenge, times, the intensity of your attack, equals, your rate of growth. It's an idea, of course, not a real formula. But you do need big challenges in your life, and you need to bring intensity to those challenges if you aim to grow. I hate to use the buds analogy so much, but here goes. It was the hardest military training in the world, multiplied by the intensity you brought to it. Now think about how much you changed. Think about who you'd be today if you'd never been a SEAL. I don't know if this is the case for you right now or not, but what stunts a lot of people in their practice isn't that their goals are too big, but that their goals are too small. It's important to be able to break big challenges down into attackable pieces, and we'll talk more about how resilient people segment challenges later, but why work your heart out for a goal that's small? 5 variables go into training or practice of any kind: frequency, intensity, duration, recovery, and reflection. Frequency is important because we learn through repetition. Our bodies and minds and spirits need to adapt between each practice. Intensity is important because we grow only when we push ourselves beyond the boundaries of our past experiences. Duration is important because we need to train as long as necessary for our bodies, minds, and spirits to adapt to our work. Recovery is important because our bodies, minds, and spirits need time to adapt to what we have learned. When we sleep after exercise, we can grow stronger. When we sleep after studying, we can grow smarter. Even monks take breaks from prayer so that their spirits can grow. Finally, reflection is important because we have to consider our performance against the standards we have set, adjust ourselves, and integrate what we've learned into our lives. Our times of practice will become isolated islands unless we reflect. Reflection is the bridge between what we practice and the way we live our lives. A book, Aristotle's work on ethics, a good biography, or one of Aeschylus's plays, can teach you about resilience. But resilience itself can only be built by practice. To build resilience, we must practice it, not haphazardly, but deliberately. And remember, Walker, in almost anything that you choose to practice, gratitude, your bench press, or making breakfast for your daughter, you are going to fail a time or 2,000. If you aren't failing from time to time, there are 2 possibilities. 1, you're Superman. Or 2, you aren't pushing yourself hard enough. Which do you think is more likely? In ancient Greece, repetition was an expected and integral part of philosophy. People attended philosophy lectures in the way that, today, people might go to church every week or read a particular magazine every month. The Greeks understood that shaping human behavior requires repetition. This is as true of mental and spiritual training as it is of physical training. We can lose focus. We take a day off, and then a week off. We forget what inspired us in the first place. And to prevent these things from happening, to prevent the slackening of effort that can come in any practice, we build structures of repetition into our lives. In repetition, 3 things happen. First, we are reminded. Most of the important things in life need to be taught only once, but we need to be reminded of them often. Marcus Aurelius's practice of philosophy was really nothing more than an elaborate system of self-reminding. He recognized that we need more often to be reminded than informed. Second, as we change over time, the same message works on us in different ways. A message about mental toughness in the face of exhaustion will be heard differently by the young athlete than by the new parent. Third, an idea is similar to a tool. For it to become part of who we are and how we think, we have to become familiar with it. We become familiar with ideas not only by reading about them or hearing about them, but by thinking about them, talking about them, writing about them, and using them in our lives. Practice and purposeful repetition are what separate an idea that interests us for a moment from an idea that becomes a part of our character. When I was in high school, I remember my English teacher Barbara Roseberg telling me a story about a young couple. I can't remember if it was a true story about people she knew or a story about people she had read about in a book, but her mind was always full of wisdom gained from both, and I don't know that it makes much difference. Here's the story. A young mother is holding a baby in her arms. At the same time, she is trying to cook dinner. Dinner is about to burn. Just as she needs to grab the pot from the stove, the phone begins to ring. Meanwhile, her husband is upstairs writing. She calls to him for help. And he murmurs something about his writing. She walks upstairs and stands in the doorway of the room where he is typing. He does not look up. She gets his attention by saying, "I need you to listen to me," and asks, "If there were a fire right now, would you run through the house to save me and the baby?" He says, "Yes, of course." She replies, "There's never going to be a fire." We talked about this before, Walker. People want to imagine that somehow, when the moment comes, they will be heroes. But there are rarely such moments in anyone's life, and when they do come, they last for mere minutes. What usually matters in your life is not the magical moment, but the quality of your daily practice. As the novelist Anthony Trollope wrote, "A small daily task, if it be really daily, will beat the labors of a spasmodic Hercules." You've talked about helping your fellow veterans who've come back from the war. You'll be great at it. One of the reasons you'll be great is that you respect people enough to know, and your own struggles have shown you, that even smart people can make bad choices. And that will set you apart from a lot of the smart people who want to change the world. Many programs run by the professional improvers of society are built on education, not training, on delivering facts rather than strengthening practice. Knowledge matters. But our efforts too often stop at knowledge, because it's easier to measure what we've told people than it is to measure how we've changed people. It is easier to preach to people than to practice with them. We're all complicated and difficult to improve, and each one of us is difficult in a different way from the next. Practice that actually improves us in meaningful ways takes huge amounts of dedicated time, skill, and attention, and even then, we can't be certain of success. Is the problem really that people don't know enough? Or is it that they don't do enough of the right stuff? It's an important question to ask, because it helps us to get clear on the relationship between education and training. We often assume that learning is enough, that once we know something is good or right or wise, we'll act on that knowledge. Only rarely is that true. We're adults. When we do things that are bad for us, we usually know they're bad for us. Our intentions and our actions never line up as perfectly as we'd like. People have struggled with this disconnect between intentions and actions for thousands of years. St. Paul grappled with it. "I do not understand what I am doing, because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate." Here was a man who knew what the right thing was and still did what he knew was the wrong thing, again and again. And those were the words of someone disciplined enough, energetic enough, and passionate enough to accomplish what Paul did. Do we expect to do any better? I don't know if you ever watched G.I. Joe cartoons growing up, but at the end of most of the shows, they'd run a public service announcement: what to do if there's a fire in your house, what to do if you're lost, why you should always wear a life jacket and obey railroad crossing signs. Every message would end with one of the characters saying, "Now you know." And knowing is half the battle. Maybe it's half. But it's half at most. Knowing is usually the easy part. Doing is much harder. In any endeavor to change practice, you have to ask, why would smart people do something that seems to be bad for them? You can usually answer that question only by getting to know people. It's helpful to know something about resilience, but to be resilient you have to practice, to train in resilience. Education is different from training. Education aims to change what you know. Training aims to change who you are. Practicing practice will enable you to, in the words of the old army commercial, be all that you can be.